15 project manager interview questions. Master your project management interviews with confidence. In this session, I will be walking you through the definitions of project management as well as 15 solid questions. Project management is the art and science of applying knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to achieve objectives. In this session, you're going to gain a clear understanding of project management, insights into the role of a project manager, and practical answers to 15 real world interview questions based on my experience. If you are ever asked the question in an interview, what is project management? There are some key things you should mention. You should mention knowledge, skills, tools, techniques. Knowledge, skills, tools, techniques. And remember, you are applying these to project activities or project tasks to achieve that end goal, that desired outcome, the main objectives. Project management involves delivering results within scope, on time, and within budget, while managing risks, quality, resources, and stakeholders. The key aspects of a project. Projects are temporary, unique endeavors, and they are undertaken to achieve specific objectives. Project management also involves balancing constraints. There are multiple constraints, and the most popular constraints in project management we call the triple constraint. Schedule, cost, and scope are the triple constraint. All of these are managed by the project manager to ensure quality is achieved and schedule, budget, and scope are intact. What is the role of a project manager? The project manager is responsible for leading the team and ensuring the project stays on course. The key responsibilities are planning, creating a roadmap to success, execution, driving tasks and deliverables, monitoring, tracking progress and managing risks, and lastly, closing, delivering results and lessons learned. Now, bear in mind that throughout these stages, planning, execution, monitoring, closing, there's a lot of interactivity. Project management is not linear. In fact, when you're managing projects, you will encounter several feedback loops. When you're thinking about project management, before we get into the questions, there's certain things that I want you to be aware of. If you are ever interviewed by someone who is a project management professional or someone who is remotely affiliated with the PMI, they will go beyond this surface level idea. And I want to be more precise with you as far as the process groups and the knowledge areas of project management. So let's take some time out to learn the 5 process groups, because what I'm showing you here is a cursory overview. Let's go into some more detail. When you think about project management in the world of the Project Management Institute, there are actually 5 groups of things that you do as a project manager. We call them process groups. The first one is you have to initiate the project, which means the project should be authorized. Planning is, as I said earlier, you have to plan the project. Executing is all about carrying out the work. And you, as a project manager, may not be doing the work, but you are driving the work. You are inspiring, you're motivating, you are encouraging. Next is monitoring, and note the addition of the word controlling. It's one thing to monitor and see things going off track, but it's another thing to actually control and bring things back into alignment. This is very important. This is the job of the project manager through and through, to monitor and control. Control is all about bridling the project, taking action, bringing it back into alignment with the plan. Last but not least, we have closing. This is where you're closing out the project or a phase in the project. So there you have it, initiating the authorization, planning what needs to be done, executing, carrying out the work with the team, monitoring and controlling, reporting on the work, and closing. Again, initiating is a job that the project manager does, and it culminates in a project charter being developed along with the project sponsor in many instances. The project charter is just that, a document, but it's a document that contains a high level overview of the project and authorizes the project. In planning, we develop a project management plan. In executing, we get the work done and a deliverable is created. In monitoring and controlling, we are checking, we are also creating reports to report on the progress, and in closing, there's a transition. These are the five process groups. As someone going for project management interviews, you should also understand the 10 areas of knowledge. Let's talk about them very quickly. Integration is weaving all the moving parts of the project into one cohesive whole. Scope is scoping out what needs to be done and managing just that. Schedule is developing a timeline for the project. Cost is understanding what the budget is and managing the budget. Quality is understanding what quality standards need to be adhered to. When are we in compliance and when are we not? Resources is all about planning and managing the human, equipment, material supplies, and facilities. Communication is about communicating what needs to be communicated, the information that needs to be passed across, and it's doing it in an intentional manner. Procurement is managing vendors and contractors. Stakeholder is all about managing your stakeholders' engagement, planning how to engage them, and in the first place, identifying the stakeholders. In the middle, I have risk as a bullseye because risk touches everything. Risk touches scope, it touches schedule, it touches cost, and so much more. Now that you have a more robust idea of project management, let's jump into our very first question. Question one. Can you tell us about your experience leading and managing cross-functional teams and delivering a project successfully? Yes, I can. When you mention the word leading and then managing, I realized that these are two different things. Leadership is all about influencing, it's all about relationships. Managing is about maintaining systems, structure, processes, and procedures. And cross functional teams require both. They require situational, strong leadership, decisive leadership, and communication. While I was at Honeywell, I managed a diverse team for a product launch using tools like RACI charts, matrices, weekly and daily meetings to ensure alignment. We delivered the project on time and exceeded sales expectations. This was a large global team that were working on one singular product, and it was a success. Question two. How do you prioritize projects and manage conflicting demands? When I have conflicting demands and conflicting projects, I often look at a number of variables. The three variables I look at: urgency, value, risk. I look at urgency because I want to ensure that those things that are urgent should be attended to. But I also look at value that it will be bringing to the firm. And I also take a look at the risk of not getting it done if I don't start early. I also evaluate projects and objectives based on strategic alignment, resources, risks, and outcomes. In a prior role, I used prioritization matrices that took into account value, urgency, and risk. And I worked with stakeholders to align trade offs, successfully delivering multiple projects without compromising quality. It's all about understanding what is most important, what is most urgent, what is most valuable, and also risks associated with all projects that I am working on. Question three. Can you share an example of a difficult decision you had to make as a project manager? I remember a few. For example, during a software project, I delayed a release to address a critical issue. Despite initial resistance, the decision ensured a successful launch and stakeholder approval. Question four. How do you measure the success of a project you are managing? For me, project success is multifold, but success should always be defined early on. It is best to work with your key stakeholders and customer to first understand what success is from their eyes. But apart from that, in general, I use metrics such as customer satisfaction, quality, schedule, scope, and as a result of these variables being measured on a scale of, say, 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, I can very quickly understand if the project was a success. But everything boils down to customer satisfaction at the end because the nature of projects I've worked on are for a customer ultimately. So if the customer is not pleased, then success has not been achieved. So those variables should all have high marks. In a website redesigned, we delivered early, under budget, and exceeded user satisfaction goals. And that's what it's all about. Question 5. Can you discuss your experience with project planning and execution? I have worked on a number of projects where I have developed detailed project management plans that cut across all the knowledge areas of scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. I've developed plans including work breakdown structures, risk management plans. In one project, proactive planning and execution helped us deliver ahead of schedule with a 15% cost savings. I've also embarked on projects where the degree of detail was very detailed. In projects like that, involving millions of dollars, the margin of error and the tolerance from management was very, very low. We couldn't afford to deviate, even though we had millions of dollars to spend. When working as a project manager, it is important to understand the variables, the knowledge areas that are near and dear to the customer. In some projects, it's schedule. They may not really mind if you went over budget, but on some projects, it's everything. It's schedule, cost, and scope. And those you need to have a very detailed, meticulous plan. Question 6. Can you walk us through your approach to risk management for a project? My approach for risk management is looking at it as non-negotiable. Risk management is extremely important because everything revolves around risk. The reason why project managers work as they do is to, as much as possible, avoid or minimize the risks. The first thing I do is I plan how to manage risk. I design my risk register. I understand what my risk matrix will look like. I understand the parameters that I would use when working with a team to score risks. After I have done that, I move into identifying the risks. Then I qualitatively analyze the risks using a very simple risk scoring structure, like a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 for probability and impact. When I'm done with that, I move into quantitative risk analysis where it is necessary. Where not necessary, I move into planning the risk responses. I also take implementing the responses very seriously, as well as monitoring the risks afterwards. I prioritize risks using the probability impact matrix I mentioned, taking a look at the risk score. Those risks that are lower in score will go to the bottom of the risk register, and those that are higher in score will be at the top of the register, and constantly analyzing risks all through. I've worked in a number of firms in a construction project. For example, contingency planning helped avoid major delays due to supplier issues. Question 7. How do you ensure effective communication and collaboration between project teams and stakeholders? Well, the first thing I do is I analyze the situation. I understand what the channels of communication are likely to be. When I've understood that, I work on clear planning. Clear communication plans and regular updates are key. For a marketing project I worked on, I tailored updates for each stakeholder, and I used collaboration tools to ensure alignment. And when I realized that the initial plan wasn't working as well, I made tweaks based on stakeholder feedback. Question 8. How do you stay on top of industry trends and incorporate them into your project management strategies? I engage in continuous learning through Project Management Institute conferences, networking, and I also am a researcher of trends. I incorporate agile practices into predictive projects. I also work on understanding how artificial intelligence is changing the project management landscape. Question 9. Can you describe a situation where you had to manage a project with limited resources? I have found this to be the case on several projects I've worked on. Limited resources such as human, equipment, materials. A project I worked on, I did not have any support staff, and I was able to work on the project to the timelines. I became resourceful. I learned how to effectively code, how to effectively test script, and how to challenge the system that had been developed as a tester, which wasn't my initial role. In a software upgrade, I used resource optimization and cross training to meet tight deadlines while staying on the budget. It's all about being innovative, taking a look at what exists and seeing if there's a multi purpose use of the resources you have, or if you can be innovative in learning the skills needed to keep the project moving. Question 10. Can you discuss your experience with budget management and financial forecasting for a project? I've been fortunate enough to have very detailed experience when it comes to budget. I use tools and techniques that involved earned value management to track cost performance. In one project at Honeywell, the order of the day was to manage my projects using earned value, SPI, CPI, CV, SV, TCPI, and more. We actually had an engineering management system where earned value metrics were analyzed and reported on the regular. Every Tuesday, I would never forget sitting down with management and going over the metrics, the SPI, the CPI, the cumulative graphs, and explaining why we were on budget and why we're not. In one experience, I was fortunate enough to see the value of management's challenging based on earned value metrics. And I did learn that earned value metrics could be extremely helpful, especially on level of effort contracts. SPI and CPI in other companies have helped save up to 5% of costs while meeting goals because it helps you see where things are missing and not adding up. Question 11. Can you give an example of a successful project launch and how you managed it? An e-commerce launch tied to the holiday season was delivered seamlessly. Proactive risk management and stakeholder alignment were key to success. Another project launch that was successful was one in which we took a traditional project and converted it into a hybrid agile project. And what made it successful was our incremental iterative approach to the work. Instead of delivering once at the end of the project, we delivered modules all throughout the 4-month period, much to the customer's delight. Question 12. Can you discuss a time when you had to handle a crisis situation during a project? When a vendor failed, I negotiated with an alternate and I adjusted the schedule and I avoided major delays by maintaining trust. Again, thinking on my feet, I was able to stop the bleeding and move very quickly to a second solution, which ended up paying off. Question 13. Can you describe your experience with stakeholder management and ensuring their satisfaction with project outcomes? All throughout my career, I've been fortunate enough to be exposed to stakeholders of different types. Stakeholders have different needs, they have competing demands. On some projects, I had more than one key stakeholder. There was one I had 7 stakeholders. But what I've realized is that you need to be near and dear to the things that your stakeholders see as near and dear. Those things your customer has hot buttons and triggers about, you should also have hot buttons and triggers about those things. When your customer raises a concern, take that seriously, chase it down, and ensure that you level off any concerns. Always go back to the stakeholders with questions or insights and ensure you're right there with them. Regular updates, stakeholder registers, feedback integration, and good old water cooler conversations have helped me achieve a 90% satisfaction rate on a recent project. It's not just about having a plan, but it's about the execution of how to keep your stakeholders engaged. That's what I thrive on, and that's what's helped me to succeed with my stakeholders. It's all about understanding why the stakeholder wants what they do and ensuring you provide it. I always go back to the Agile manifesto that says our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of value. And that's one thing I achieved on this project, delivering value constantly. Question 14. Can you discuss a situation where you had to make changes to the project scope and how you handled it? When making changes to the project scope, I understand that it's not about me. I understand it's about the stakeholders, the customer, and most importantly, the team. So using a structured change control process, I bring the change request to our team. First of all, I have the team review the change request and decide if this is feasible or not. They give their commentary as far as how it will affect the triple constraint of schedule, cost, and scope. I document the impacts. You document how you will phase the changes in, and you present that to a change board or your boss. It is easier to see how that change request can be implemented. One of the things I've learned is when you get a change request from a customer, you don't say no, even if you feel it cannot be done. You actually owe it to the team and the customer to give it a lot of thought and analyses. And after the analyses, as opposed to pushing back on it, one of the best things you want to do for the customer is to give them alternatives, trade-offs. Don't just say, no, we can't do it. Instead, let them see the trade-offs. Maybe you can trade off scope for schedule or schedule for cost or something else. It is all about being on the same page with the customer. So the steps that I would go through as far as managing changes to scope are to first of all consider what is being asked, analyze, send on or escalate to a higher power so they can come into the decision-making process. And based on what they decide, you either implement the change by putting it back into the process after a lot of analyses and consideration, and you may have to adjust the schedule, you may have to make other tweaks, but don't just say no to a change request, whether big or small. One of the things about the Agile Manifesto, it says, welcome changes even late in development. I encourage project managers to think like that. Question 15. Can you describe a project where you had to lead a virtual team and how you ensured their effectiveness? In a global software rollout, we had a globally dispersed team. We had people in every continent of the world. But what I made clear was the times, the dates where we were to meet as a team, especially those times where we did joint testing and where all hands needed to be on deck at the same time. I scheduled overlapping meetings. I used collaboration tools. I fostered team cohesion with virtual activities, and I truly cared about the team and their well-being. One of the things that I would do with my virtual team is have a welfare check at the beginning and a heartfelt thank you for the engagement at the end. This has seemed to work on all the projects where I had virtual teams. So, my friends, we've been taking a look at 15 project manager interview questions. I hope this gives you confidence and an idea about the cadence, your rate of speech, your demeanor, and your composure when answering these questions. I would encourage you to prepare your answers to these just in case you ask questions like this. In addition to this, my friends, I want you to prepare stories and examples around these pillars of project management because you very well could encounter them. Before going for your interview, ensure that you have examples of where you developed a charter where you define the scope and requirements, where you built a schedule, where you were involved in computing the budget, how you determined the quality standards, how you effectively managed any resources, how you communicated, how you managed the contract, and how you engage the stakeholder and effectively manage risks. You could very well get questions surrounding these areas, so narrow down your answers. When it comes to the process groups, I want you to do the same thing. I want you to have examples of how you were involved in project authorization, if you were, how you planned the project, how you drove the work, how you inspired and led, how you monitored and controlled the project, and how you closed the project. You're going to find a lot of times the questions will revolve around those. Finally, I want you to be aware that there are some philosophies of project management. We call them project management principles. As you go into an interview, I want you to also think principles. Give examples of where you were a good steward, how you foster collaboration, examples of how you effectively engage with stakeholders, and how you focus on value, examples of how you are a systems thinker, a big picture thinker that sees the integration of things, how you've demonstrated leadership. Understanding leadership is influence, examples of where you've had to tailor processes to your project, how you've upheld quality, how you've had to tackle complexity. How do you tackle complexity? One of the best ways to tackle complexity is to break things down into smaller pieces, and that is a coping mechanism for complexity. Risk is all about uncertainty. We've talked about that. Have examples. Adaptability and resiliency go hand in hand. If you have any examples of how you have upheld that or your mindset towards that, that could be helpful. And change, enabling change. Give examples of how you've enabled change. I want you to really spend some time thinking about these. The questions you encounter on your interview may be slightly different, but if you're thinking in this vein, this same frame of mind, you will find it a lot easier. If you have not been involved in structured project management, I want you to be aware that there are 49 things that we do in project management. It may help you to know a little bit more about this, except you're already certified and you have that knowledge. Otherwise, I want to flash these on the screen very quickly. We have processes we carry out in integration. You can take a look at them, just slow down the screen. The summary is you are coordinating all the moving parts of the project. In scope management, we have processes we work on as well to effectively collect the requirements, define scope, and manage the scope. In schedule management, we have processes that are driven towards a timeline, understanding what the timeline is and managing the timeline. In cost management, the four processes here are all about understanding the budget and then effectively controlling cost. Next, we talk about quality, understanding the quality standards and managing them. In resource management, we have 6 things that we do to better understand our resources, to acquire them, to develop those who are human, and to manage the resources. In the world of communications, we plan what to communicate and then we drive according to the plan. In risk management, there are 7 things that are done, and I mentioned these as we went through the process, but you got to plan, you got to develop a register, and then you got to analyze and then manage the risks proactively. In procurement, there are 3 things we do. We first need to determine if a procurement is truly needed, and then we need to sign a contract with the vendor after we send out our RFPs, RFQs, and then we effectively manage the contract. Last but not least, in stakeholder management, you want to ensure you identify those stakeholders, plan how to get them engaged, and then engage them and make tweaks accordingly. So, the big picture of project management, my friend, is understanding the 5 process groups, the 10 knowledge areas, and understanding the 49 processes I just showed you real rapidly, and then the base, the principles that this all rests on. I hope you found this to be helpful and informative. I wish you all the very best in your project management. If you have questions, do leave them below. Bye for now.